welcome back to another Mystery Box Monday. If you don't know what this series is all about, go ahead and hit this link up here, and that'll take you back to the first video in this series, which explains how this project works. And if you're curious, I've got a playlist on my channel with all of the previous episodes, so you can go back and see them all. So we'll go ahead and get started with this episode. So as usual, I'm going to take the box off screen. All right, I am reaching in. I am finding 3 things. So thing number 1 is a stamp set. And now I can feel what some of these things are. Oh, but I've got something interesting that I don't know what it is. Here's thing number 2, which is actually a little set of things. So that'll be different. And then got a little thing. Thing number 3 is very little. Oh boy, let's see what we've got. This appears to be a Halloween item, and oh, it says it's actually a die and not like a pre-cut piece. Well, maybe there's a die in there. Okay, at first I thought it was maybe a pre-cut piece. So let's go ahead and open this up and see. Yep, there's definitely a die in there. So we've got a Halloween die face. And then in this little goodie bag, now it says share handmade kindness. I know that is like a Jennifer McGuire common phrase, and I know she has a stamp set about sharing handmade kindness and a charity. She does some charity work about that. So this all seems to be, and yep, it says, I don't know if the camera's going to pick that up, but it says Jennifer McGuire Inc.com on it, and I'll put a link to her stuff because she does a lot of card making videos. If you don't know who she is, she's a big name in the industry for card makers. So stamp with, yep, and there's her logo, bunch of stickers. This looks like a set of postcards. And it's just a big set of postcards. And then a message probably about the share handmade kindness. So I'm not going to read that out right now, because the goal of this process is to put these diverse random set of supplies together in a single project. So we'll move on to thing number 3 is a stamp set, and this says Trinity Stamps, and it's from 2018. This says Let Love Grow stamp set. So if you're looking for all of these items, like I've said in the past, they're likely to be discontinued items because of the nature of this project. However, whatever I can find, I will put links to in the show notes. So if you like these things, there might still be available. So, and this one is just kind of has at first I thought it was just florals, but it has a succulent to it. It says I'm a sucker for you, so it definitely has the popular succulent theme going on. This actually looks like some crystals, which I've seen in some other products. So stay with me as I put these 3 things together into a single project. So for this random set of supplies, I decided I needed a really interesting technique to kind of bring a cohesiveness together to this project. And I am going to do a scrapbook layout today, and I just learned this really interesting technique that I haven't seen before, and so I am not going to take credit at all for this technique. I will, in a moment, I will give credit to the person where credit is due. So stick with me and find out who I learned this technique from. So here is my stack of supplies that I've got going on, and I've got that die set that's a Halloween set, and I have this little baggie of elements that were a Jennifer McGuire product, and now I'm just going to use this stamp and just the word kindness on that stamp, and I'm going to use that to build my title. Oh, pardon my kitty there. I forgot he'd gotten in the frame when I was filming. He likes to join me when I'm crafting. So anyway, so there's again this Halloween set, and I'm going to use those eyes to make leaf elements to go with all of the floral patterns that are on this next stamp set. So this stamp set was full of flowers, and so I did let these products guide my project in that kindness and flowers were both part of these pictures that I had taken of my daughter and I volunteering, and we posed in front of the, thank you volunteers sign. So I pulled out a couple sheets of just plain white cardstock, and I used my Cricut to cut out these hearts from that second sheet, and that's where this technique comes in, and we'll get to that. I also used a scrap piece to cut a separate heart, which is going to have my title on it. So this technique comes from Sam's Messy Desk, also known as This Messy Desk or My Messy Desk, and I will have links to her stuff below. So what she does is she kind of does this shaker element kind of style, but instead of using shakers, she cuts out these frames, and then she uses them to draw on to a second sheet of paper, draw these frames on, and then she fills in the frames with random stamps. So instead of being shaker elements and all of the difficulty of setting that up, she's got them with stamps. So now if you don't have a Cricut, that's okay, especially with these simpler shapes. What you can do is, use the old-fashioned technique on a scratch piece of paper of cutting out your hearts, and then you can use that to trace it onto your background sheet of paper and then kind of punch a hole in the center of those hearts and then just use a pair of scissors to trim out those heart shapes. They won't be quite as tidy, but it'll get the job done. And you can do this for sure without a Cricut machine. So don't let that intimidate you if you're worried about it. So then what we do is, I pulled out some ink here to, pardon me, to go along with this project. And I think at first that I'm just going to use these three colors, but then I do later go out and pull out a green, which I forgot about my leaf elements. So I've got this big heart here is cut out that's going to do my title, and we'll get to that in a minute. And I will pull out some extra letter stickers to go with my title. So what I'm doing here is just tracing this sheet that I cut the hearts out from, and I did, this top sheet is trimmed down ever so slightly. I think it's about 1/4 of an inch on each side or so, and that's going to give another layer of dimension to this project. So I'm just going to trace these hearts so that when I take this upper sheet away from the screen, I will have confined spaces in which to do my stamping, and otherwise you could just kind of spend your time stamping on the whole background sheet, which you don't need to do that, so why waste the time? So this pencil marking will give you a better set of space to work with. So I'm going to speed you up here, and I am setting up all these stamps onto a couple of stamp blocks, and that's going to kind of speed up my stamping process. And I'm picking out lots of flowers and a few words from the stamp set that all seem to make sense. And then I use this big jumbo stamp set in red, since the flowers in my photos are red. And then I just kind of fill in the blank spaces around with other colors of smaller flowers. And that was one of the tips that Sam had mentioned, is that you start with your larger images and then work your way down to smaller and smaller images. Now here I am doing some second generation stamping, and what that means is you can stamp your first stamp with the full ink, and then before you even re-ink your stamp, go ahead and stamp it again, and that gives you a lighter shade of color. And that's how you can make your 3, in this case, ink pads really stretch even farther, because it looks like you have more colors than you actually do. So I'm getting some rich reds, I'm getting some soft reds, some deep blues, some soft blues, and the same with the black, turns into a kind of a gray color. So that stretches my ink pads even farther. And I'm just filling in all of these heart shapes until they're completely full to the edges. And then you can see when I bring my sheet back over how it looks messy here, but when you line it up with that sheet, then you really get the pow of that effect. And I'm just erasing my pencil marks because there's no way I'm going to get those perfectly lined up again. So now I'm turning to my title, and I am going to use that giant stamp set and this second generation stamping idea. Now, instead of stamping it full strength on my project, I'm stamping it on a scratch piece and then doing the second generation of stamping onto my title block there, which is just that heart. And then I am going to use this kindness word, and I'm inking up the word kindness and then just kind of wiping off the excess ink that rubbed at that got exposed on the rest of the stamp. And now I missed some, and so I'm just using a Jennifer McGuire technique of scraping it off with a craft knife and then using a little sand eraser to sand it down, and that got rid of most of it, but it didn't get rid of all of it. So I'm just adding a little bit more stamping to my title here, and that covers up my mistake just fine. And now I am giving some more emphasis to this block by inking the edges, and then I'm going to do the exact same thing with all my hearts in this cutout sheet. And so here we are, and everything is inked up and ready to go. I've used my stamps, both my stamp sets from those two items, and now I've got that die to use up, and we'll get to that in a minute as I add embellishment to this page. So I'm going to start building everything together. And I'm going to add my photos and my journaling right onto this piece before I start building up the layers, because I'm going to add foam dots behind this piece to give it some dimension off of that back sheet with the stamping. I want to make sure I do my journaling first, because otherwise it's going to be hard to write on top of lumpy, bumpy foam tape. So I'm going to start my journaling, and I'll just skip through most of this process so you don't have to watch me write, and we'll get on to the next step. All right, we are back. Photos are done. There it is, journaling's done. I did pull out that extra letter sticker set to go with my word kindness, and I'm going to spell out the magic of kindness. And I use this phrase because it's a prompt from the current Layout a Day challenge, and I'll link more information to Layout a Day today. I'll link more information to the Layout a Day challenge in the show notes, so that if you're curious about what I'm talking about, you can go check it out. So I am spelling out the magic of kindness, and I just kind of gently place my letters at this point because I want to help line things up in a moment, and I'm going to pull out my T ruler, and I'm going to give myself kind of a straight line across the word kindness, and then I'm going to make sure all the tops of those letters are kind of lifted up, and I'm just going to use my tweezers to pull all of the letters out and about and kind of lock them into place. And then once everything's lined up to my satisfaction, then I'll pull that T ruler out of the way and just press everything down to permanently adhere it. Now, this isn't straight to the heart, but that's okay because I'm going to tip the heart on my page a little bit, and here I am getting that set up. And I'm going to make that heart just a little bit wonky on the layout, and it's going to hang over the edges of this this top piece just a little bit so that it will kind of overlap and take up some of the space of the lower piece. So now we're going to assemble this whole thing. You can see you can just glue it straight down onto this layout and you'll get an interesting texture and dimension. But if you add some foam behind this, and Sam had recommended using like sheets of craft foam and cutting out big blocks, and honestly that would be a lot better. And probably more affordable and more sturdy, but I don't have sheets of craft foam lying around, so I'm just using my regular foam dots. And while it probably could have used a lot more foam dots, I mean, there's only so much I can do and so much expense with these foam dots, so I just kind of hit most of the open areas, and then I adhere it down to that back panel. Now I have a little bit of mistake there hanging out, and I'll just fix that like I did with the craft knife before, and it won't bother me too much. Now notice I applied ink around the edge of that whole top piece to show the dimension a little bit more. And so here I am moving on to some embellishing, and I'm going to, I hand stamped extra flowers, and I'm going to fussy cut those out. And then with my die here, I'm going to use those eyeballs and maybe that mouth to create some leafy elements to go with my flowers. So I was really wondering how I was going to use this Halloween die to fit with all these flowers, and I tell you, I figured something out. So I just have this little tiny die cut machine, and I'm going to go through and cut out a bunch of these little shapes. Now they look kind of like half moons here, but I think they'll be fine when I dye them with the ink. That's why I pulled out this green ink pad. So this is how I like to, I use this scratch piece of leftover backing from my foam dots. And then I put all my little pieces directly onto my ink pad, and then I use that backing piece as a protection for my fingers, so I can just press those little die cut pieces straight into the ink pad, and that will dye my pieces for me. So these shapes are a little funky, like I said, but they will turn into leafy elements when they're tucked in behind everything else. So it's a kind of a little bit of a interesting technique there to make this challenge work. So for these flowers, I'm going to give them a little bit of extra dimension just by kind of folding up the edges, and I'm going to do that with all of them, and I won't take you through the whole process because you kind of get the idea. I'll just do a few of these, and then I'm going to use those black flowers as kind of the centerpiece of my little bundle of flowers, and that's going to help spread the black elements from my title and my journaling kind of across the page, so the black doesn't seem too harsh in just those spots. So here you see me tucking the green pieces in, little leafy elements, and kind of the mouth of that jack-o'-lantern turns into like a vine flowing down. So that's what I'm going to do with that. And here we are. I've got all of my clusters put together, and they've all got a little bit of texture and dimension, and I know it's a little hard to catch it on camera, but I hope you can see this this technique going on both with the stamped hearts and with these fussy cut flowers. So I will set you up with a few photos, and then I'll say goodbye for today. So as you see these close-up photos, I would like to again shout out to scraphappy.org. I mentioned the Load Challenge, and they host that. They also have a membership group that learns techniques, and that's actually how I learned this technique. So check out them, and then go straight to the source and check out Sam's Messy Desk, where this technique came from originally to be shown on the membership group of scraphappy.org. So those resources are in the links below. See you next time. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, and get notifications for my future videos.